Hello, AP Lang. It's Mr. Johnson here once again. We are going to do two things that we don't do nearly enough of. First of all, I'm going to share my writing with you. Teachers, you all know we can write, but I carved out 10 minutes of my day. And I wrote one of these. So I'm going to share mine with you, and I'm going to revise mine, and I'm going to read it to you and show you what I came up with. And the other thing that we don't do enough of is revision. So I'm going to revise my paragraph today. I'm going to show it to you, and you are also going to revise your paragraph before you actually turn it in today to your Lang teacher, so that they won't even know that you made mistakes. That's the goal. So here's my paragraph. I'll just read it to you, obviously there's things that are not perfect about it. I wrote it in about 10 minutes, and I'm going to revise it today as well, and then. So here it is. By paragraph 5, Marquart's sweeping initial overview of the Midwest, punctuated by specific anecdotes and her own commentary, is completed by the juxtaposition of the two most famous mythologies of the place. Like all mythologies, there's some truth in these two, and both serve as windows into the Midwest for readers coming from outside of the region, or as familiar, if satirical, mirrors for her fellow Midwesterners. Garrison Keillor's Lake Wobegon is a fictional town, populated almost exclusively by Lutherans who get up to fairly innocent hijinks. Midwestern readers will nod knowingly at the embarrassed humility of the catchphrase, where all the women are strong, all the men are good-looking, and all the children are above average, while even the most uninitiated outsiders may remember the overly exaggerated accents of Fargo from the movie of the same name. Part of Marquart's point in this paragraph is that both of these views of the Midwest are exaggerated and fictional, but she is also making room in a reader's mind for one more narrative, her own. So right off the bat, I'm noticing there's a few issues with mine. I feel like, I second guess myself here, but I feel like this should have a hyphen. Embarrassed humility, I'm trying to create like a hybrid word there. I feel like that should have a hyphen. I oftentimes get hyphens mixed up, and I honestly don't know how to use them. So sometimes I just throw them in there just because I'm doubting myself. I guess my initial thought with this was, okay, so I'm trying to articulate tensions and complexities. I'm trying to say to my graders, which I guess is just you guys, that Marquart has a kind of a tricky balancing act here. She's trying to appeal to both of her audiences, as I see it. Her audience that's outside of the Midwest and her audience that is inside of the Midwest, and she has to try to appeal to both and grab both audiences' attention. And I think the place where she does that most effectively is that I think it's the fifth paragraph. Yeah, paragraph 5, where she's talking about Garrison Keillor and about the Fargo movie. There's other things that I wanted to put in here, but this paragraph would be too long, and I don't necessarily think that my audience would get this if I were to add in my own personal anecdotal experience. Like I could tell them, for example, that Garrison Keillor has a face for radio. I know that to be true. Would that help my argument? Probably not. But I do want to sprinkle a little bit of that information in there, just so that my reader knows that I know something about the Midwest. I don't necessarily need the word initial. Sweeping overview of the Midwest is fine, punctuated by specific anecdotes in her own commentary. And her own commentary, do I need that? Probably not. I think it speaks for itself. It's completed by the juxtaposition of the two most famous mythologies of the place. Sure. I like that sentence. I'm going to leave that in there. If satirical mirrors for her fellow Midwest. I think that's cool. Populated almost exclusively by Lutherans. I'm really proud of that phrase. I think it's important to note that... Here that I could talk more about this, right? Like I grew up in Avon, Minnesota, right next to the Lake Wobegon Trail. Coincidence? I think not. I know a lot about Garrison Keillor's show. I've seen the movie Fargo once, I think, maybe twice. So I know some things about the Midwest, and I just want to make sure that my audience knows that I know. Is there a better word for embarrassed humility? Probably. I'm just going to leave it. Where all women are strong, blah, 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 blah. While even the most uninitiated outsiders may remember the overly exaggerated accents of Fargo from the movie of the same name. From the movie of the same name. Do you need the of the same name? Probably. I'll just leave that in there. Anyway, my thoughts on this paragraph are pretty much this. I'm thinking about this paragraph in terms of an entire essay. If I were to write an entire essay, I think this would be paragraph number 3, so body paragraph number 2. And I would talk about kind of the first part of it, that opening metaphor. I would try to relate to that on a personal level. Then I would move into this paragraph. Or maybe I would talk about I don't know, maybe this would be paragraph 3 and I would skip over the history. Anyway, I think this would be paragraph number 3 or 4 in my overall essay, and I kind of start that way. I start by saying by paragraph 5, as if there was something else that came before this, but it also stands on its own, right, as an introduction. So, and then I kind of say, okay, here's what Marquart is doing. You want to be able to demonstrate that you can recognize her strategy as a whole, and then you can also see that she is drilling down with a specific choice. In this case, I think the choice is that she's using specific anecdotes, and then in this particular paragraph, she's putting 2 anecdotes in juxtaposition. She's placing them side by side, right, as a way of comparing them, right? And so that's what I'm trying to communicate in my first 2 sentences. As I sort of move through that, I also want to demonstrate that I am aware of some of the tensions that Marquart has to deal with or take into consideration as she is writing these paragraphs herself. And those tensions, as I see it, are her relationship with her potential audiences. And I see 2 of those audiences here. And so I think what she's trying to do here is she's trying to bring up the 2 most famous examples. So if you drew a Venn diagram of the 2 audiences and where they sort of coalesce or what they have in common in terms of cultural awareness, it's going to be Garrison Keillor's Lake Wobegon, and it's going to be the movie Fargo by the Coen brothers, right? So that's where her audience consideration comes into focus, and it revolves around this 5th paragraph. I think. So that's what I'm trying to articulate here. And it's worth noting that Garrison Keillor's Lake Wobegon is a very different picture of the Midwest than the Fargo movie, but both have something to say. And then I think her overall goal with this is to say, look, these are 2 very different views. However, there's room in this space for another narrative, and that's mine. And that's why I end with that little thing at the end. She's trying to make room for her own narrative here, and that's where she's going to transition into history and then transition into her own family history as well.